They called it an informal chat. That's what the email said. Like we were two friendly strangers catching up over cappuccinos, not one desperate job seeker and three managers with matching pens. I wore my best shirt, the one that looked clean enough if you didn't stare too closely at the collar. I had even practiced my enthusiastic but humble smile in the mirror. It came out somewhere between "hire me" and "please don't notice my trembling hands." When I walked into that glass-walled interview room, the first thing I noticed wasn't the people, it was the smell. A mix of burnt coffee, printer toner, and just a pinch of superiority. You could almost taste it in the air. Relax, I told myself. It's just a conversation. But it wasn't. It was an audition for a role I wasn't invited to play. They asked me about 5-year goals, team synergy, and real-world leadership experiences. I gave answers that would make a motivational poster proud. They nodded politely, wrote something on their clipboards, and I knew it wasn't going well. There's a particular silence that follows a doomed answer. It's not empty, it hums with judgment. One of them, a man with a tie so tight it looked like it was choking him, said, "You seem enthusiastic, but we're looking for someone with more experience." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't, I might cry right there under the fluorescent lights. "Of course," I said, as if I too were disappointed in the underqualified applicant sitting in my chair. They wrapped it up quickly. One even smiled sympathetically, the way a waiter might when you can't afford dessert. "We'll be in touch." Spoiler, they wouldn't. I left with my folder of resumes still warm from my hands. Outside the air was cold and smelled of rain. I remember thinking the world looked extra shiny that day, not because of hope, but because everything was wet and slippery, like it was trying to laugh at me. At the bus stop I watched other people scrolling their phones, looking busy and important. I wondered what that felt like, to belong somewhere. To have your name printed on a lanyard and your coffee mug waiting at a desk. Instead, I had an empty inbox and a landlord who didn't accept character growth as rent. I tried to distract myself by replaying the interview in my head, rewriting my answers like an obsessive screenwriter. Why didn't I say team leader instead of good collaborator? Why did I bring up my freelance blog? Every memory turned into a small, sharp regret. When the rejection email finally arrived the next morning, crisp, polite, and copy-pasted, I almost laughed. It began with, "Thank you for your time," and ended with, "We wish you the best in your future endeavors." My future endeavors. That day included finishing a pack of instant noodles and updating my LinkedIn headline to something vague like "open to opportunities." But here's the funny thing about rejection, it leaves behind a kind of static in your brain. It hums until you either tune it out or turn it into fuel. That night, as I lay on my sagging mattress, listening to the neighbor's TV leak through the walls, I whispered a small, foolish promise to myself. One day, I said, they'll remember my name. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but that sentence, whispered in the dark like a secret prayer, stuck, and somewhere between bitterness and belief, a seed began to grow. I didn't realize it yet, but that rejection wasn't the end of my story. It was the prologue to something much more satisfying, the kind of story where the punchline takes years to land, but when it does, it's delicious. I drifted to sleep that night, dreaming of glass walls, polished shoes, and the sound of my own name being said with respect, or at least, with surprise. The next morning smelled like defeat and instant coffee. I stirred the cup with a fork because I'd lost my only spoon somewhere between career aspirations and not experienced enough. Outside, the city hummed with the sound of other people's productivity. Buses screeching, shoes clicking, lives moving forward without me. I sat by the window of a cheap cafe that charged extra for whipped cream, a luxury I now treated like an investment. The barista called my name wrong again, and I didn't bother correcting her. At this point, even caffeine seemed to have given up on me. I opened my laptop and stared at job listings like they were dating profiles. Seeking candidate with 5 years of experience for an entry-level position. Dynamic self-starter who thrives under impossible expectations. Must be passionate about synergy. Synergy, the word that haunted my nightmares. I applied to 12 jobs that day, and after each click of submit, I rewarded myself with another sip of lukewarm coffee. Somewhere around application number 8, I realized my career plan had become less of a roadmap and more of a scavenger hunt. Find anything, anywhere, that pays rent. By the time the cafe started turning off the lights, I was still there, my laptop battery clinging to 4%. I glanced at my reflection in the screen, tired eyes, unshaven chin, and that same faint smirk that said, "You're not done yet, are you?" That smirk was dangerous. It was the same look gamblers have before they double down on bad luck. The next day I tried to distract myself by taking a walk. The air was thick with exhaust and optimism. Not mine, of course, but other people's. I passed office buildings full of people tapping on keyboards, and for a moment, I envied even their boredom. Then I saw it, a man in a suit walking out of that building, the one where I'd had my disastrous interview. He was laughing into his phone, probably about his weekend golf score or a new intern who spelled budget wrong. I don't know what came over me, but I followed him for a block. Not in a creepy way, okay, maybe a little, but more like a documentary narrator studying his subject. Observe, I whispered to myself, the successful professional in his natural habitat. He got into a shiny car. I got into the bus behind it. The difference between us was about $40,000 a year and a parking permit. That night I pulled out a notebook and started scribbling ideas. Not resumes ideas. If they wouldn't hire me, I'd find a way to make them regret it. But not through revenge. Not yet. I wasn't that dramatic yet. I just wanted to win somehow. The first idea was a list of things I could do with zero capital. Freelance writing, tutoring, maybe selling my organs. I crossed that one out quickly. The second idea was Dharma, starting my own micro-agency. I didn't even know what that meant, but it sounded good on a business card, so I made one, a free template, printed on my roommate's inkjet printer. It looked professional if you didn't stare too hard at the smudge where CEO bled into the paper. I started pitching small gigs on freelancing sites. Most clients wanted miracles for $20. Can you design a full brand strategy by tomorrow? One asked. Sure, I said, while Googling what brand strategy meant. There was one client, a bakery owner, who couldn't pay much but offered me free croissants. I took the deal. That's how low the bar was. Flaky pastry in exchange for graphic design. And yet, something shifted. For the first time, I wasn't begging to be chosen. I was offering something, even if it was mediocre. Days blurred into nights. My desk became a battlefield of empty mugs and sticky notes. I stopped counting rejections and started counting completed projects, no matter how small. Each time a client said thank you, it felt like a microdose of success. Not enough to live on, but enough to keep me awake. I wasn't rich, or confident, or particularly skilled yet, but I had momentum, and momentum, I discovered, is louder than motivation. Still, rent loomed over me like a low cloud. The landlord's text came that Friday. Friendly reminder, payment due tomorrow. Friendly reminder, like a shark politely asking if you'd like to get eaten before lunch. I took a deep breath, looked at my dwindling bank balance, and decided, fine, if the world wouldn't give me a seat at the table, I'd build my own rickety folding chair and sit anyway. So I ordered another cheap coffee, opened my laptop, and began sketching, literally sketching, plans for something that didn't exist yet. A company, maybe, or just an idea stubborn enough to become one. The paper napkins soaked up a ring of coffee, right over where I'd written the words, "Start small, end loud." And though I didn't know it then, that was the first brick in the empire I would one day use to buy the building that once threw me out. But first, I needed to survive another month, and maybe get a spoon. Freelancing is a glamorous word for being broke in sweatpants. The first few months felt like juggling fire while blindfolded, except the fire was unpaid invoices and the blindfold was my optimism. My office was a second-hand desk crammed between my bed and the kitchen, where the Wi-Fi signal was strongest if I sat at a specific 32-degree angle. Every morning I logged in, fueled by instant noodles and desperation. My gigs were eclectic. One week I was writing product descriptions for cat toys. The next, I was designing PowerPoint slides for a life coach who used Comic Sans unironically. My crowning achievement, creating a logo for a client who said, "I want it to look rich, but like poor rich." I still don't know what that means, but I said yes to everything. Yes became my business strategy, my mantra, my caffeine substitute. Then came the tutoring job. A wealthy executive wanted someone to help his teenage son with English essays. The pay was good, suspiciously good, so I ignored the red flag. When I arrived at their mansion, it had a gate code, which should have been my first warning. I was greeted by a boy who looked at me like I'd just crawled out of a group project he didn't sign up for. He flopped onto the couch, earbuds still in. "You're the tutor?" he asked, incredulous. "I'm the educational consultant," I corrected, trying to sound expensive. He smirked. "Dad says you couldn't get a real job." Ouch, kids are brutal. No corporate filter, no HR policy, just pure uncut truth. I smiled like a professional and said, "Good thing I'm here to make sure you do." We got along eventually, mostly because I taught him how to fake essay confidence using big words like juxtaposition and existential. His grades improved, but not as much as my patience. Every time I left that mansion, I told myself, remember this feeling, not forever, just for fuel. Freelancing gave me two gifts, resilience and insomnia. I learned how to handle clients who changed their minds hourly, how to negotiate without crying, and how to fake competence at 2 a.m. when my brain was fried. One night a client refused to pay after I'd spent days finishing a project. I stared at their curt message. We decided to go another direction and laughed out loud. Not the happy kind. The slightly unhinged, "I haven't slept in 3 days" kind. That's when I decided, no more working for people who didn't respect me. I'd start finding ways to work with people, or better yet, above them. So I shifted gears. I began reaching out to other freelancers, designers, writers, coders, and offered to connect them with clients. I didn't have a company yet, just a shared spreadsheet and an email signature that said founder, but it was enough to make me sit a little straighter. Within a few weeks, small projects trickled in. We weren't exactly a business, more like a support group for the underpaid. Still, the system worked. Clients got their work done, freelancers got paid, and I got a cut. I started calling it micromanagement, half as a joke, half as branding. One of my collaborators suggested a name, the Patchwork Agency. It fit. We were a collection of odd pieces sewn together with caffeine and ambition. And for the first time, my inbox started to look busy. Sure, I still had nights when I stared at the ceiling wondering if I was delusional, but the fear had a different flavor now. It wasn't despair, it was momentum. Then, one morning, as I sat in that same cafe with the smudged table and bad Wi-Fi, I overheard a conversation at the next table. A man in a blazer was complaining loudly into his phone. "They hired the wrong consultant," he said. "We lost the pitch because their strategy was outdated." Something in me clicked. Strategy, consulting. Buzzwords that used to make me feel small now felt like puzzle pieces. I opened a new document and wrote 3 words: Creative Strategy Solutions. It sounded official, corporate, like something that could be printed on glass doors someday. I emailed a few contacts, pitched a few ideas, and to my surprise, someone bit. It wasn't much, but it was the first time a company hired me instead of some faceless vendor. I celebrated by buying a proper meal instead of instant noodles, rice with chicken, sprinkled with the taste of minor victory. That night, as I worked on my laptop, the city lights outside flickered like static. I realized I was no longer running from rejection. I was quietly, stubbornly building something behind its back. Still, every so often, I'd think about that interview room, the polished table, the smirking manager, the polite dismissal, and I'd whisper to the dark, not yet, but soon, because revenge, I was learning, doesn't always arrive in fire and fury. Sometimes, it begins with Wi-Fi, a spreadsheet, and a logo made on a borrowed laptop. Failure has a way of teaching you faster than any business course, mostly because tuition is pain. Every mistake came with an invoice of its own: unpaid projects, burnt-out collaborators, sleepless nights that smelled like burnt toast, and regret. By month 8 of running the patchwork agency, I realized we were less an agency and more a chaotic family group chat that accidentally made money sometimes. My designer ghosted me for a week because of creative exhaustion. Translation: heartbreak. My copywriter quit mid-project after discovering her true calling was astrology memes and me. I was juggling invoices like flaming swords, pretending it was all part of the plan. Still, beneath the mess, something was forming. I was learning rapidly, painfully, constantly, how to pitch without sounding desperate, how to read people who said maybe but meant never, how to turn "we'll think about it" into "we sent the deposit." It was an unpaid MBA in human nature. Every loss made me sharper. Every awkward email became a lesson in tone. I started recognizing patterns: what made clients say yes, what made them run. The secret, I discovered, wasn't in being perfect. It was in being real enough that they believed you could fix their chaos because you lived through your own. I began to brand myself around that: authenticity, grit, startup realism. It wasn't fancy, but it sold. One night, halfway through rewriting a proposal for a tech company that couldn't decide if it sold apps or dreams, I looked at my cluttered desktop and realized something wild. I was actually good at this. Not the emails, not the invoices, the building, the seeing a gap and filling it part, the pattern recognition, the turning frustration into framework part. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. So I started devouring business books. I'd listen to audiobooks in the shower, watch startup documentaries during lunch, even fall asleep to TED Talks. My brain became a crowded subway of ideas and caffeine. I kept a notebook titled, "Things I'd Do Differently If I Were a CEO." It started as a joke but turned into a 60-page manifesto. Every arrogant email from a client added another entry. Every corporate cliché: let's circle back, align expectations. Low-hanging fruit became ammunition for my future rebellion. And somewhere between notes about leadership and cash flow, the idea took root. What if I actually could run something big? It was absurd. I still worked from a chair with one missing wheel. My team lived in 3 time zones and 2 emotional breakdowns, but the idea wouldn't leave me alone. Then came my biggest mistake, which, naturally, turned into my best lesson. A potential client, a sleek fintech startup, wanted a complete brand overhaul. It was the biggest project we'd ever been offered. I said yes before I even knew what the deliverables were. We dove in headfirst. Weeks of brainstorming, sleepless nights, endless Slack messages. When we presented, the client said, "Interesting direction, but not quite what we had in mind. Translation: we hate it. They didn't just reject the work, they ghosted completely. No payment, no feedback, just silence. It hit like déjà vu, that same polite dismissal I'd felt in the glass-walled interview. I stared at the screen and felt my chest tighten with something heavier than anger. Not because of the money, though that hurt, but because I realized something deeper. I'd been chasing their approval again, just like before, and that's when the switch flipped. I wasn't going to build things to please anyone else anymore. Not clients, not investors, not invisible judges in suits. If I was going to fail, I'd fail on my own terms. So I tore the old business plan apart and started over. No more chasing contracts that drained us. No more pretending to be a professional agency with sterile jargon. I leaned fully into what we actually were. Messy, honest, creative, fast. We weren't a service provider. We were a team of rebels who helped brands tell the truth. The rebrand was impulsive. I changed our name overnight to Truth Lab. Bold, slightly pretentious, and entirely me. And weirdly, it worked. People liked our rough edges. Clients came because we didn't sound like everyone else. Our proposals had jokes in them. Our campaigns had soul. I remember the first big client who said yes to the new us, a startup that had been burned by slick agencies before. We just want something real, they told me. Perfect, I said. We're real to a fault. From there, things snowballed. One project led to 3 more. Freelancers wanted in. I hired my first actual employee, a project manager who could juggle chaos like a circus act. We started making real money. Not yacht money, but no longer eating instant noodles money. And one night, sitting at my desk, I caught my reflection again in the dark window, older, more tired, but sharper. There was something new in my eyes, a quiet kind of confidence. Failure had stopped being a wall and become scaffolding. I leaned back, exhaled, and smiled. So this, I whispered to the room, is what experience feels like. Momentum is a dangerous thing. Once it starts rolling, you either ride it or get crushed under it. Truth Lab was suddenly alive. Clients we once begged for now emailed us. Our Slack channel buzzed like a beehive with too much espresso. I had actual employees now, not just freelancers orbiting my inbox, but real, breathing people who looked to me for direction, approval, and paychecks. The first time someone called me boss, I laughed out loud. I thought they were joking. Then I realized horrifyingly that they weren't. We rented a small office, the kind that came with suspicious carpet, stains and motivational posters left behind by the last failed startup. It smelled like determination and leftover pizza. But it was ours. I remember the first morning there. I walked in with a cup of coffee and this odd sensation that time had folded in on itself, like all the rejection, all the waiting, had condensed into this tiny moment where I finally belonged. Of course, belonging came with taxes, invoices, and stress-induced eye twitches. Growth was messy. Every new client meant more work, more pressure, more ways to screw up spectacularly. I learned to read contracts like sacred texts and to fake calm during 2 a.m. crises when servers went down. But in between the chaos, something magical happened. People started believing in me. It was a strange reversal. For years, I'd been the one begging to be believed in at interviews, in emails, in late-night pep talks to myself. Now, my team was betting their rent money on my decisions. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. I started to enjoy the little rituals of leadership, morning check-ins, inside jokes, the quiet hum of keyboards when everyone hit flow state. There was laughter, too, not the polite kind from corporate meetings, but genuine, stupid laughter. One time, our designer accidentally sent a draft ad to a client with the slogan, "Your brand. Probably better than it deserves." We didn't lose the client, we gained one. They said it was refreshingly honest. That became our unofficial motto: honesty sells, humor seals. We grew fast, too fast. I was barely sleeping, juggling projects and payroll, pretending to be calm while secretly Googling things like how to not collapse from imposter syndrome. One night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and half-eaten donuts, and realized something. I'd become addicted. Not to success itself, but to the chase. Every milestone felt incredible for about 5 minutes before my brain whispered, "Okay, what's next?" It's a dangerous loop: achievement, followed by emptiness, disguised as ambition. And then, for the first time since that humiliating interview, I hit burnout. It didn't happen suddenly. It crept in quietly, like a low battery icon blinking in the corner of your mind. My ideas dulled. My humor went dry. Even coffee stopped working its miracles. One afternoon, during a meeting, I caught myself zoning out completely while someone talked about brand ecosystems. I nodded, pretending to follow, but my brain was on a beach somewhere begging for sleep. Afterward, my project manager, bless her, cornered me. "You look like you're about to dissolve," she said. "Thanks," I replied, smiling weakly. That's the look I was going for. She didn't laugh. "Take a break," she said, seriously. "Go outside, touch a tree or something." So I did. I spent a weekend offline, no emails, no meetings, just me and a notebook. I sat in a park watching people who didn't live on deadlines, who laughed without checking their phones. It was unsettling at first, then oddly healing. I realized I'd spent so long trying to prove myself that I'd forgotten to be myself. All the success in the world meant nothing if it turned me into the same kind of exhausted, hollow executive who once told me I lacked experience. When I came back Monday, I made a decision. We were going to grow smarter, not just bigger. I started delegating, training, saying no. Okay, trying to say no, still a work in progress. And something shifted. Projects got smoother. Clients stayed longer. The team stopped fearing mistakes and started experimenting again. That's when the word started spreading, not through ads or campaigns, but through whispers in the right circles. Truth Lab doesn't fake it. They're weird, but they deliver. Their founders obsessed, but in a good way. Before I knew it, we were getting calls from companies I'd once daydreamed about working for. One morning, my assistant handed me a meeting request. "They want to discuss a partnership," she said. I glanced at the logo on the email and froze. It was them, the company that had rejected me 2 years ago. For a moment I just stared at the screen, sipping my coffee slowly to hide my smirk. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor, but I didn't say anything out loud. Not yet, because revenge, when done right, tastes better served professionally with a calendar invite attached. The email sat in my inbox like a ghost from a past life. Subject line: Partnership Inquiry, Strategic Branding Collaboration. I reread it 3 times just to be sure. It wasn't a scam, it wasn't a prank. It was them. The company that once told me, with polite smiles and rehearsed pity, that I wasn't experienced enough. Now their logo was glowing on my screen, asking for my expertise. I stared at it for a long time, sipping coffee that had gone cold. There's a strange feeling when your past comes knocking, part vindication, part disbelief. My first thought wasn't triumph. It was exhaustion. I'd been running at full speed for 2 years, and suddenly, I realized I'd arrived at the exact starting line I'd once dreamed about. And somehow, it didn't look as shiny as I remembered. Still, curiosity won. I replied, professional and calm. "Thank you for reaching out. We'd be happy to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Let's set up a meeting next week." No emojis, no exclamation marks, just a perfectly neutral tone. The kind that says, I have better things to do, but I'll indulge you. I hit send, leaned back, and exhaled a laugh that came out half croak. Then, because the universe enjoys irony, I realized I had 3 major deadlines that same week to client presentations, and a team that still thought I was some sort of unshakable genius. Spoiler, I was shakeable, very shakeable. That week, I ran on caffeine and adrenaline. My body felt like a startup itself, functional but always on the verge of collapse. I caught my reflection one night and thought, you look like success and burnout had a baby. The meeting with them was set for Friday morning. By Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. My brain was a chaotic boardroom, half plotting strategies, half imagining revenge scenarios. Would I act cold and detached? Would I drop hints about their old rejection? Or would I play the long game, charm them, outsmart them, and watch realization slowly dawn? In the end, I didn't decide. I just showed up. Friday, 9 a.m. Their office lobby looked exactly the same. Same marble floors. Same receptionist desk. Even the same faintly smug scent of lemon-scented disinfectant. Walking through those glass doors felt like stepping into an old nightmare, except this time, I wasn't the nervous kid clutching a folder. I was the one they were waiting for. A manager, not the same one who'd interviewed me, but close enough in energy, greeted me with that corporate grin, friendly but cautious. Mister, he paused, glancing at my card. Ah, founder of Truth Lab, welcome. Thanks, I said, shaking his hand. Nice to be back. He didn't catch it, of course. The irony slipped right past him, like poetry through a spreadsheet. We walked through the office, and I noticed everything. The grey cubicles, the sterile air, the motivational posters still preaching teamwork makes the dream work. It looked smaller somehow, not physically, but spiritually. We entered a meeting room with a long table, polished to a mirror shine. A few executives sat waiting, laptops open, faces expectant. One of them, a familiar face, looked up and froze slightly. It took him a second, but recognition flickered. Oh, he said, you look familiar. I smiled. We've met. His brow furrowed. Really? Yes, I said, voice calm and steady. 2 years ago, interview for the associate position. The silence that followed was exquisite. You could have heard a spreadsheet drop. Then, like any good corporate survivor, he laughed it off. Ah, well, small world, isn't it? Smaller every day, I said. The meeting went smoothly, surprisingly so. They presented their branding struggles, their declining engagement, their need for fresh storytelling. I listened politely, took notes, nodded thoughtfully. Inside, a small version of me, the one who once left this building humiliated, was dancing. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly, slowly, the way I'd practiced for investor pitches. Your issue isn't visibility, I said. It's voice. You're talking, but no one's listening. You sound like every other company trying to sound human. They nodded, impressed. One even whispered exactly. For a moment, I almost forgot this was personal. I was just in my element, confident, articulate, unapologetic. Afterward, as we shook hands, the same executive who'd once dismissed me said, "You've come a long way." I smiled, soft and professional. "Experience, right?" He blinked, a little sheepish. "Right?" When I left the building, the sunlight outside felt different, like it was applauding. I didn't feel revenge or rage, just peace. Maybe a little smug satisfaction, but mostly peace. Later that night, my team celebrated the new contract we'd secured. Yes, they hired us, poetic justice at its finest. I raised my glass and toasted lightly, to experience the kind you can't fake, and the kind you can't buy. Everyone laughed, not knowing the full story, and maybe that was the best part. The revenge didn't have to be loud to be complete. But the universe wasn't done with me yet, because just when I thought the story had come full circle, an email came through from an investor who'd been watching our rise. He wanted to meet. Let's discuss expansion, he wrote. Your company has potential beyond what you might imagine. I closed my laptop slowly, feeling that old spark again, the one that had started it all. It turns out, success doesn't end with payback. It begins right after it, and the next chapter, it wasn't going to be about proving myself. It was going to be about building something unstoppable. It came on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday that feels like a filler episode in the show of your life. The sky too gray to care, the coffee too bitter to matter. I was in my office, half drowning in invoices and half watching my marketing intern rehearse a presentation to imaginary investors when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. London area code. Hello, this is I began, but the voice on the other end cut clean through my routine. Mr. An, the voice said smoothly, I've been following your company for some time now. Normally when someone says that, they're either about to sell me software or enlightenment. But this voice had the kind of calm that only comes from money, real money, the kind that doesn't panic. I'm calling from Grafton Capital, he continued. We specialize in scaling high-growth creative firms. Yours caught our attention. Would you be open to a discussion? I didn't answer right away. Because if this had happened 3 years earlier, I would have jumped out of my chair, but now, I'd learned the hard way that every big opportunity comes dressed like temptation, so I said the only reasonable thing. I'm listening. We met that Friday in a glass-walled cafe high above the city, the kind of place where they serve coffee that costs more than lunch and smells faintly of ambition. He introduced himself as Oliver, late 40s, tailored grey suit. Watch that probably knew the time in 5 time zones. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never worried about late rent. He started talking numbers, market trends, valuation multipliers. I nodded, trying not to show that my brain was silently converting millions into how many sleepless nights that would cost. Then he leaned forward and said it, the line that flipped everything. We're not just offering funding, we're offering a partnership. You stay in charge, we provide capital, connections, and an exit strategy that makes you rich enough to retire before you're 40. I should have been ecstatic. I'd built my company from my bedroom floor. No loans, no safety net, just caffeine and anxiety. Now someone wanted to turn it into a global player, but behind his polished smile, I could see it. The same spark I'd seen in those corporate boardrooms, that quiet hunger to own things. I stirred my coffee and asked, why us? He smiled. Because your brand isn't afraid to tell the truth. You sell authenticity in a market drowning in pretense. And authenticity, he said, tapping the table for emphasis, is the new luxury. The flattery worked, partially, but my instincts buzzed. I'd been the desperate one before. Now I was the prize. He slid a folder across the table. Preliminary offer. Take a look. I think you'll find it generous. I opened it. I did find it generous. Obscenely generous. Numbers that could pay off my student loans, my parents' house, and still leave enough for me to buy a coffee plantation to feed my addiction. Of course, Oliver added, we'll need to restructure leadership slightly, scale efficiently, bring in our people to help with it was the hook beneath the bait, their people, their control. I closed the folder gently, like it was something alive. I'll think about it, I said. He smiled, slow and sure, like a man who's already closed the deal. Take your time. Just remember, Mr. Anhan, opportunities like this don't come twice. I left the cafe with my pulse drumming in my ears. The city around me looked different, sharper, louder. Every reflection on the glass buildings seemed to whisper, take it, take it. But I'd spent too many years chasing validation, too many nights rebuilding after mistakes that looked exactly like miracles at first. That night, I sat in my apartment, lights dim, the offer folder on my desk, like a loaded weapon. The number screamed yes. My gut whispered not yet. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice, my own, younger, angrier voice, muttered, "Don't sell what they can't build." I didn't sleep. I paced. I imagined both futures, the rich one and the right one. By morning, I knew what I had to do. When I met Oliver again the next week, I wore the same calm expression he'd used on me. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but we're not ready to sell. Not yet. Maybe one day when you're buying into our vision, not over it." He blinked, then smiled with genuine surprise. "You're a stubborn man." I shrugged. "I learned from the best." He extended his hand. "Then I suppose we'll be seeing more of you." I shook it. "Steady, you will." As I walked out, I felt something strange, not pride, not defiance. Freedom. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval or revenge. I was protecting what I'd built. And that, I realized, is what power really feels like. Sometimes, revenge doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like silence, a polite handshake, a delayed smirk. A few months after turning down Grafton Capital's offer, Truth Lab was thriving like never before. The decision had lit something inside the team, a fierce pride, the kind that makes you stay late not because you have to, but because you want to prove you're worth betting on. But fate, or poetic symmetry, maybe wasn't done writing punchlines yet, because not long after that meeting with Oliver, we got another email, this one from them. Yes, the same company that had once rejected me, 2 years and several heartbreaks ago. The "you lack experience" people, the gatekeepers of my humiliation. Only now, the tone was a little different. "We've been following your firm's growth with admiration. We're looking for a creative partner to revitalize our brand for a global relaunch." I read it 3 times, out loud, slowly, then laughed so hard I spilled my coffee all over my desk. When I told my team, they went feral. Someone actually suggested we reply with, "Sorry, we only work with experienced clients." Tempting, very tempting, but I didn't want to gloat, not yet. Revenge, to me, wasn't about rubbing their faces in my success. It was about being undeniable. So I scheduled the meeting. Their headquarters hadn't changed much. Same gleaming lobby, same cold marble floors, same overconfident receptionist with a headset and an unreadable smile. But I had changed. Walking through those doors again, I didn't feel small anymore. My shoes clicked differently this time, like punctuation marks instead of apologies. They greeted me with handshakes and practiced warmth. The irony was almost sweet. "Mr. ANH, the senior director said, the same man who had once told me I wasn't ready. "It's great to finally meet you in person." Finally, I had to bite my tongue not to say, "Oh, we've met before, you just didn't remember my name." Instead, I smiled and sat down, letting the silence stretch. Silence, I'd learned, was power's favorite instrument. They pitched their project something about rebranding, digital integration, repositioning. The same buzzwords they'd used years ago to intimidate me. Only this time, I understood every layer of their jargon, and I had better ones. "So," I said, leaning back, "you're not just looking for design, you're looking for reinvention." The director nodded, visibly impressed. "Exactly. That's why we came to you." There it was, the full circle moment. For the rest of the meeting, I kept my tone measured, professional, almost soothing. The same calm I'd once envied in people like him. Every time he deferred to me with, "What do you think, Mr. Anha?" I felt a quiet, glowing satisfaction bloom in my chest. By the end, they were already eager. They wanted us, they wanted me. And then, like the universe couldn't resist a perfect twist, One of them said, "We'd also be open to discussing longer-term integration, perhaps even acquisition." Acquisition? I blinked. "You mean buying my company?" "Yes. Strategic consolidation. You'd retain a leadership position." Of course. Of course. It took every ounce of self-control not to laugh right there. They were offering to buy the company founded by the kid they once rejected. I told them I'd think about it. That night I stayed late in the office again, my new office, bright and alive, filled with the hum of creative chaos. I looked around at the people who had trusted me when no one else did, and I thought, what if I did buy them instead? It started as a joke, one of those absurd, late-night ideas fueled by caffeine and ego. But when I mentioned it to my finance lead, she didn't laugh. "It's not impossible," she said, scrolling through numbers. "They've been struggling with revenue the last 2 quarters. Their stock dropped 40%. You actually could." I blinked. "You're serious?" She smiled. "Deadly." That night we ran projections. The math was insane, but not impossible. I had partners now, investors who trusted my judgment, and a company that had tripled its valuation in under 2 years. Over the next 3 months, I didn't just work. I maneuvered, quietly, patiently. We began acquiring their suppliers, their freelancers, their side contractors one by one, building influence where it mattered most. And when the moment came when their board finally realized what was happening, it was too late. TruthLab, the startup with attitude, had effectively surrounded them. Then, in an elegant twist of poetic irony, the acquisition offer came full circle, but this time, it was ours. I didn't show up to the meeting in a fancy suit. I wore what I'd worn the day they rejected me: jeans, plain shirt, the same old watch. When the papers were signed, the director, my old interviewer, avoided eye contact. His voice was tight when he said, "Congratulations, Mr. Anhar. Looks like you finally got your experience." I smiled softly. "Experience tends to show up after you stop asking for permission." He nodded once, defeated, and that was it. No grand speech, no slow clap, no cinematic explosion, just silence. A quiet takeover. The sound of justice folding itself neatly into a deal memo. As I left the building, now technically my building, I paused in the lobby. The same marble floor, same sterile echo, only now, the echo answered me. You'd think buying the company that once rejected you would feel like a victory parade. Trumpets, fireworks, slow motion, confetti raining over your smugly satisfied face. Instead, it felt like paperwork. Endless, soul-flattening paperwork. There's a funny thing about success. The closer you get to the mountaintop, the less oxygen there seems to be. I'd spent years climbing, obsessed with this exact summit, and when I finally stood there, the view was foggy. The deal closed quietly. The press called it a strategic merger. The industry whispered about a bold move by a rising star. I called it what it really was: revenge in a 3-piece suit. At first, it was intoxicating. The headlines, the congratulatory emails, the LinkedIn messages from people who'd once ignored mine. Everyone suddenly wanted to catch up over coffee, which, translated, meant "teach me your secret." My secret: bitterness, espresso, and insomnia. But then came the part no one prepares you for: what happens after you win. The newly acquired company was a mess. Half the employees were terrified of layoffs. The other half acted like corporate ghosts haunting the office. The morale was so low even the potted plants looked like they'd given up. I tried to lead with kindness, with empathy, I really did. But every time I walked through the halls, I could feel their eyes. Some looked at me like a savior, others like an intruder, and a few, the older ones who remembered my interview, looked at me like karma personified. One afternoon, during a staff meeting, one of them asked, "So what's the plan, Mr. An?" How do you intend to fix us? The room went silent. I wanted to say something brilliant, something that would make me sound like the visionary leader the media believed I was. But all I could think was, I don't know. So I said, first I need to learn what broke you. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And sometimes honesty is the only rope you can throw into the void. The months that followed were humbling. I learned more about management than any book or podcast could teach. I learned that power doesn't make you immune to self-doubt, it just gives you better suits to hide it in. I also learned that success magnifies everything: your strengths, your weaknesses, your bad habits, your caffeine dependency. There were days when I felt like a fraud wearing a crown, nights when I sat in my office, staring at the city lights, wondering if I'd become the very kind of person I used to despise, obsessed with metrics, detached from meaning. But amidst the chaos, something began to shift. I started listening more, to the employees who'd been silenced under old management, to the interns who had wild, reckless ideas, to the designers who saw things I didn't, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the company began to breathe again. We scrapped their sterile corporate branding and replaced it with something rawer: campaigns that felt human, not algorithmic. The numbers followed, but what mattered most was the energy. The building didn't feel haunted anymore, it felt alive. And in that process of rebuilding, I realized something painful. My revenge story was never really about them. It had always been about me, about proving my worth, about rewriting a moment that once defined me. But once that moment was rewritten, there was nothing left to prove. The anger that had driven me, sharpened me, suddenly felt heavy, like armor I no longer needed but didn't know how to take off. One night I stayed behind long after everyone left. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels almost sacred. I walked into the old interview room. It was still there, untouched, same glass table, same sterile chairs. I stood where I had sat years ago, the nervous, untested version of me, and whispered, "You were right to fail me, but I was right to keep going." For the first time, the memory didn't sting, it just settled, like dust after a storm. The next morning, I told my team we were restructuring again, not for profit, but for people. I wanted every employee, from intern to executive, to feel like they had a stake in this story. We introduced profit sharing, flexible hours, a mentorship program, real transparency, the kind I used to crave when I was on the outside. And just like that, the company stopped being mine, it became ours. The headlines shifted again. Now they called it the Comeback Company. And when they asked me for comment, I said, "We're not a comeback story. We're a reminder that rejection is just a redirection. If you keep walking long enough, you might end up owning the detour." The journalist laughed. "That's poetic. Poetry's just good accounting," I said, and winked. They quoted it verbatim. Success isn't a single mountain, it's a range, endless peaks and valleys. Sometimes you're climbing, sometimes you're catching your breath, and sometimes you realize the view you've been chasing was just the reflection of a younger you, asking, "Are we enough yet?" That night, I finally answered, "Yes, I think we are." The first anniversary of the takeover came quietly. No champagne, no fireworks, just a light drizzle outside the office windows and the faint hum of keyboards under warm yellow light. I stayed late that evening, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted to feel it. The calm, the stillness, the way life somehow rearranges itself when you finally stop pushing. On my desk sat a single invitation card, embossed letters, elegant font, the kind of design that screams expensive understatement. It was from a business conference, theme from failure to fortune, the reinvention of modern leadership, and right there, printed in glossy silver letters beneath the title, guest speaker, Cam Kwang Kyanan, founder and CEO, Truth Lab Group. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes from deep recognition. 2 years earlier, I couldn't even get past an interview at a desk half this fancy. Now, I was being paid to tell people how I did it. The event was held in the same hotel where that first rejection meeting had taken place. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. As I walked through the lobby, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the marble floor. Same person, different posture. I wasn't walking faster than I needed to anymore. My shoulders weren't hunched under invisible weight. I wasn't trying to be noticed. I already was. The ballroom shimmered with suits and perfume and expensive confidence. Rows of familiar faces, some I'd pitched to, some who'd ignored my emails, a few who'd even borrowed my slides back when collaboration meant unpaid ideas. And somewhere in the crowd, I saw him, the senior director, the man who'd told me, "You're just not ready." He didn't recognize me at first, but when he did, his eyes widened slightly, not in fear or regret, but in realization. He nodded, just once, a quiet acknowledgement that said everything words couldn't. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage. The lights hit my face, warm, blinding, electric, and for a brief second, I saw my younger self sitting in the back of that same room, clutching a folder of dreams and rejection scars. I started speaking. Slowly, calmly. 2 years ago, I said, I was rejected by a company that thought I wasn't ready. They weren't wrong. I wasn't. But rejection, I paused, is just another word for redirection. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Some laughed softly, others nodded, pens poised mid-air. I used to think success was about proving people wrong, I continued. But it turns out, the sweetest revenge isn't making others regret rejecting you, it's building something so meaningful that you stop needing revenge altogether. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the faint scratch of someone's pen. I told them about the sleepless nights, the almost failures, the absurdity of managing payroll while pretending to be calm. I told them about laughter and chaos, about burning out, about coming back softer, not harder. And then, I ended with this. You don't need to be chosen to be worthy. You don't need a seat at their table if you can build your own. And if you ever find yourself sitting where I am today, don't gloat, smile, because that's when you know you've healed. Applause rose like a wave, not wild, not forced, just genuine. When I stepped off the stage, the director was waiting near the exit. He extended his hand. That was impressive. I shook it firmly. "Thank you," I said. It took a few rejections to get the timing right. He chuckled softly. I suppose it did. Then he leaned in, almost sheepish. "If I may ask, what made you keep going?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. Because I couldn't stand the idea that my story would end with someone else's no. That night, after the crowd dispersed, I found myself standing on the hotel balcony, overlooking the city. The rain had stopped. The streets shimmered under the lamplight like veins of gold. Everything was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with completion. I pulled out my phone, opened the old rejection email I'd never deleted, and read it one last time. "We appreciate your time, but at this point, we're looking for someone with more experience." I smiled, whispered softly, "Thanks for the motivation," and deleted it. For good. And now, here we are. The lights have dimmed. The applause has faded. The story, like all stories, begins to soften around the edges. You can almost hear the hum of the projector winding down, the soft closing of a door that no longer needs to be guarded. The boy who once sat nervously in a glass room has walked far through nights of doubt, through the brittle sound of no, through the quiet hum of becoming someone he didn't have to prove anymore. In the stillness, the revenge dissolves into something gentler, gratitude, maybe, or peace, or just the calm knowledge that you made it not in spite of them, but because of everything you learned on the way. So rest now, let the echoes fade. The city still glows beyond the glass, and somewhere out there, another dreamer is hearing their first no. Maybe they'll keep walking, too, and maybe, one day, they'll look back the same way you just did, and smile, because full circles don't shout, they whisper. You're ready now. End of script. Sweet dreams.